Hello, Physio practice owners. If you want to know how to create a very strong culture for your practice that drives growth for your practice year on year, then this is the episode for you. Hello, and welcome to today's episode. It is called Creating a Culture of Excellence for Physio Practices. Now, one of the big reasons I want to create this episode is when it comes to having the people in the practices, when I speak to a lot of practice owners, what they tend to focus on is literally one of the common themes is expecting a certain something from the actual staff, all right? Without perhaps considering what you might be able to contribute to create a stellar culture that will literally have a huge impact, a huge upward impact on your staff to give them, so the staff returns more to you as a practice. So I really want to create this episode with the mindset of that. Now, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that I really think when it comes to creating strong cultures, I still believe we can still educate ourselves a lot more to create a strong culture. I don't think it's really there yet. Not to the point where it needs to be to create an absolutely superstar, stellar team, right? Now, before I go into the depths of this episode, I just want to mention, if you haven't read this book, The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle, right, I really recommend that you read it. As a practice owner, this will be almost like a guide and a handbook for you to consider a few ways that you can really inject a lot of culture into your practice. Like I mentioned, so the whole team as a unit drives growth year on year, all right? Without you, because you've got a superstar team that's doing it, right? If you really think about it, if you look at the greatest teams in the world, whether it be sports, business, whatever it is, politics, you name it, all right? Whatever team that is just absolute stars of what they do, one of the key components is because they are a strong unit, very strong unit. They work extremely well. They're polished when they work together. And because of that, they move with purpose and they drive with purpose. And your practice is no different. It's a team. It's a team sport, right? So when you start thinking like this, and you as the leader, looking at ways to inject this into your team, looking for ways to improve it, it's going to have returns for you in the end anyway. But in the end, you're going to create a bunch of really happy people that are really happy to be at your practice and drive it forward, right? You'll make a great positive impact for the humans that are actually working in your practice, right? So very important, because what tends to happen is in a typical environment, a typical unit, workforce, let's call it a team at work, is people can tend to be tippy-toe around when it comes to really being themselves and contributing towards the team, because they're a bit cautious about what people might think. Am I worthy enough? And all that kind of stuff. And what that does, if you really think about it, it just holds that person back, right? And it'll send a subliminal, subconscious signal to everybody else that they'll behave the same way. And as a result of it, everyone's being cautious and on the back foot rather than being forward, proactive, and driving the unit together. So I'm going to share some principles today that I've seen in really successful practices that work really well. I'm going to share some principles and frameworks that you can put into your own team. All right. So, by the way, that book that I mentioned, The Culture Code, like I said, read it if you haven't read it, because what it does is it researches 8 of the highest performing and the most successful groups in the world, right? Some of the examples are like the Navy SEALs, a very successful NBA team like the San Antonio Spurs, the Pixar Studios, a gang of thieves and criminals, looks at all walks of life to see what makes a really great team great. And you as a practice owner and a leader, you need to be on top of mind with this and really inject this into the team, right? Even more if you already got it going. Okay. Before we get into all that sort of stuff, what is a culture? I really believe culture is how your team feels about each other and how your team works with each other and together to make everyone better and drive towards a common goal. That's what I really believe what culture is. All right. If you have a strong unit like that, like I mentioned, you're going to be very unified. You're going to back each other up. You're going to be there for each other when, I guess, things don't go really according to plan, but you're going to be there for each other to push forward. That is the kind of strong culture that you want. Because think about it. You probably have been at some point in life in a team like that. It becomes unbelievably infectious. You don't want to leave that team. Why would you? Because you'll feel really great about being a part of that team. You're there to uplift each other. You need to back each other up. And don't get me wrong, this is not to be like too fluffy and to be nice and be soft and stuff. No, you still need to be ruthless in terms of the standards you drive, right? But having a strong unit and a culture, right, will help you drive it together more. All right. So that's a very important thing. So some of the examples, like I mentioned about, is like the San Antonio Spurs, right? If you haven't heard of them, they're a very successful. They're an NBA team, right? In the US, obviously, and they, compared to the caliber of players that they have, right, to the caliber of players that they have in that team, and comparing that with other similar teams, the Spurs have been far more successful in terms of win percentages. All right. This book has a look at why that is the case. And I'm about to share with you exactly what those are in this episode as well. Has a look at Pixar Studios, right? Especially at its infancy when it first started. And it was beating Disney at creating stellar box office movies, all right? Movie after movie. Disney is a huge company. Pixar's relatively small at that time. And it kept on beating Disney at amazing movies. How did they do that? Because of the culture that they've created. I'm going to share with you exactly what that is. All right. So it's a big concept, but what do you think, what I think everyone should feel in a team, and what I've gathered from really successful practices, is that you need to have this aura, this energy of you belong. It's safe to speak up here, and we have a purpose. All right, it's a three-pronged approach. All right, there needs to be this sense within the team that you as a team member belong. It's safe to speak up here, and we have a purpose. That is what everyone should feel, and it is up to you as a leader to make sure that you create that in the team. Right now, don't get me wrong. Like I said, this is not a reason to slack off and lower standards. No, you got to set the standards. You got to be, like I said, ruthless with the standards and how you drive them. But being able to say that even if you make a mistake, you still belong here, right? And it's safe to speak up here. You're not going to be judged, right? And we have a purpose to get to as a team. Very important, right? That's what you really should be creating, right? So let's break that first part down. Feeling like you belong. And this is, when you look at each of these parts, the three parts, they're actually very easy, because you as a person, as a practice owner, you would have done this with somebody at some point in your life, right? Think about it. Like for your children, all right, they feel they belong to the family. They belong as a part of this family. They feel that, all right? And you would have helped to create that feeling for that person, right? That is what you really need to create for all of your team members, right? Obviously, you have to have the right team members. If they're not the right fit, they'll need to go. But there's more episodes on that. Have a look at, right? But you need to really make them feel like they truly belong, and they are part of the family. That's very important. And like I mentioned, it's very easy to think and do this because you would have done this at some point. Now, one of the things that can be difficult to do this is you might think that you're trying to be nice, right? And part of it is. You're trying to make them feel like they belong. But like I said, does not mean that you drop the standards and be nice when they don't deliver, all right? You got to acknowledge them, all right? You got to make sure that you drive the standards. Everybody makes mistakes, but it's all about minimizing them, all right, and driving forward. because mistakes, if they don't repeat, there's a reason why they're happening. It's either a people problem or it's a system problem. All right. Generally, the first thing is it's a system problem. If you don't have a system to deal with the problems, then it's a system problem. Sorry, if you don't have a system to deal with the problem, then it's a system problem. But if you're really doing all these kind of things and it's still failing, it's probably a people problem. But either way, you need to make them feel like they belong. It's a big thing. So how can you do this as a practice owner? What can you do? It's like I mentioned, it's just all about, again, if you think about how you've done that in the past, let's go with your children, for example, all right? You spend a lot of time with them, all right? So you can, as a practice owner, you can create lots of team building activities, that social things, or going for activities that enforces that sense of team unity, to have a good time, laugh, and they unite together as a team. It could be something fun, whatever the team enjoys. They can change this up. And the other thing is, we can often highlight the mistakes, but not the achievements, right? So part of being a great team member and making them feel like they belong is you got to really celebrate when they have done something amazing, all right? With the whole team, all right? That's part of what you're doing. That's very important, okay? And the next thing, all right, so that's the belong part. You got to make them feel like, almost like they're a child. They're a child of your practice. All right, you got to create that feeling. The next thing is, it's safe to speak up here. It's safe to speak here or speak up here. And one of the big things is, when it comes to especially the Western world, because it can be in the workforce, it can be pretty competitive, right? And as a result of it, there could be a lot of pretense and overconfidence and not enough vulnerability, right? Because let me get this very straight. Even the most successful companies, teams, whatever you want to call it, they've made mistakes. It is impossible to avoid. It's impossible. If you're human, it's impossible to avoid. So because of that notion of the competitiveness, vulnerability can take a backseat, which is what it's all about when it comes to safe to speak up here. And you need to, all right? If you make a mistake, you got to be really honest about why that mistake happened so you can minimize it. And you can't do that if you're a little bit on the back foot and you want to pretend like everything's okay, but I've got it and all that kind of thing, okay? And you will only get to that stage if everyone in the whole team, right? And this is a huge point. If everyone in the whole team truly feels like they can be themselves and share their ideas without judgment or fear, right? Let me say that again. It's very important that you make everybody feel that they can truly be themselves and share ideas or concerns without fear. Very important to do that. Because if you can't do that, people are going to be a little bit rigid and stuck, you can imagine. And remembering mistakes do happen and speaking them out and dealing with them is very important. Okay? So, like I mentioned, you got to have an environment where they can speak up and truly be themselves without actually having any judgment or fear. Let me give an example. So the Navy SEALs, Dave Cooper was one of the leaders or the leader in the Navy SEALs. He used to be very good at this vulnerability part, knowing that people make mistakes and it's okay to make mistakes, but you've got to obviously, let's try and have a look at how to minimize mistakes. He used to have this saying, Dave Cooper that is, he goes, team, if we're on the battlefield, if you see me next to a window, what do? And the team would go silent. And obviously you can imagine if you're in the battlefield, you're on the window, you have a clear line of sight to shoot that person down, right? And Dave knows this, and obviously everybody else knows that you shouldn't be hanging around a window. So he's trying to say, what would you do if I make a mistake? And everybody would go silent, and he would go, I need you to get on the radio and tell me to get the hell out of there. Meaning that he's saying that he might make mistakes. He's going to make mistakes. You need to speak up and deal with it as a team, right? So when you break down the hierarchy, all right, when the whole team becomes a team and they play their role and they ignore hierarchy, that's the kind of stuff that'll happen. Everyone needs to speak up and put their ideas in to work together as a team, all right? So just the message behind that is you're going to make mistakes. I need you guys to tell me if I'm making a mistake so I can correct myself. That's the kind of feeling you want. You're the practice owner. I can guarantee you, sure, you're the leader, you're the driver, you're the visionary, but you're going to make mistakes. And it's really making sure that your team knows that you're going to make mistakes and you want the team to pull you back in line if you do. That is a strong team. That means everyone's a leader. There's no one single leader. Everyone is a leader. All right. So how would you foster something like this? How would you foster it's safe to speak up and it's safe to speak up in the practice? All right. Like I mentioned, it really comes down with you as a practice owner and the leadership team. You've got to show genuine openness and vulnerability to set the tone for the team. All right. If you pretend like you're not going to make mistakes, you're going to be perfect, it's not going to work. All right. Because that's what you're telling the rest of the team to do. That's not possible. All right. No matter how much you think it's not possible, if you're a human, you're going to make mistakes. It's just the way it is. Right. So part of it is being vulnerable. And when you make a mistake, admit to it and really say, guys, I messed up here. I stepped up here. And being that vulnerable makes it okay for everyone else to do the same. Because you really want them to come and help you if they see you doing something that you shouldn't be doing, right? And you don't know anything about it. You want them to be leaders. That's the whole point. Another way of doing it is when the team gets together, get them to share open stories. Be open with their stories and challenge them to be really open about it. But it all should start with you. Okay? Now, the third part is, so we talked about you belong. It's safe to speak up here. And the third part is having a purpose, all right? It's no good just being nice and being supportive if you don't really have a purpose, all right? You as a practice, you have a purpose, whatever that purpose is, all right? And one of the key ways these successful units and teams remind themselves of what their purpose is, they actually they use actual artifacts, like physical artifacts. Let me give you an example. So when a Navy SEAL walks into their office or headquarters or their base, they go through, for example, some shrapnel and some remnants from 9/11, the World Trade Center attacks. All right. Things like that. They're reminded every single day why they're there. It is to prevent things like that. Right. The Spurs, the NBA team, they have a saying called pound the rock. All right. It literally means you just got to keep pounding at that rock. Even if it's not doing anything, you got to keep pounding at it because at one point or another, that rock will crack, which is what you're trying to do. All right. You got to keep pounding the rock. No matter what the rock is doing, it'll eventually crack. You got to keep pounding it. Right. So they actually have a rock and a little, I guess, a chisel or a mallet or something like that as a symbol. Okay. So they use little catchphrases and they use physical artifacts. All right. Think of what you can do in your practice that you can come up with something like a pound the rock for your practice. What's your purpose? All right. And what are some physical artifacts that you can put in? Maybe some testimonials. Maybe it's some happy patients, or maybe it's the community impact that you had. Right. What are some things you can put in your practice that you can use as a reminder as to what the real purpose of being as a team? All right. So that's a very important thing. So I hope that's helped, because if you really think about it, I just want to highlight this quote for you before I go. All right. Culture isn't one aspect of the game. It is the game. For your practice to be successful, the whole team needs to drive forward. Not just one or two or 50% of them. The whole team needs to drive forward. All right. So the culture isn't just one aspect of the game. It is the game. Without the team and the culture, you just can't move forward. Simple as that. All right. So I hope you found that very useful. If you did, head to our website. There's more things like this, videos to watch, checklists to download, all that kind of thing. And our website called physiomarketing.co. Go check it out. And if you're like most practice owners who want an expert in this area, physio practices, to help you grow your practice, I encourage you to go to our website as well, physiomarketing.co. Book yourself a call and I'll see you next time.